welcome to our second International Women's Day network. I don't know who else was on the first call that we did. Joy, yeah? Anyone else? Kate? Oh, and Jan, yeah. So we have a few people who were here at our inaugural network, and that was really about bringing women together around leadership and basically exploring ideas, different ways in which people have coped, different ideas and about how people have worked in the social enterprise sector, thoughts from women leaders. So we're really pleased to have Daniela. Do you call yourself Danny, or do you just call yourself Danny?
Yeah.
Danny?
I call myself me. You can call me whatever you like.
Yeah. Okay.
My mom calls me.
Yeah. All right. Well, it would probably be quite a good thing just to whiz around the room so that you know
I would love that.
everybody is. Obviously, you've met me, and I run the Social Enterprise Mark, which is the accreditation body for social enterprises, and we do have a franchise in the US. I think I might have told you, but and a number of mark holders now actually going through the process in the US, which is really great news, including the Social Enterprise Alliance. I think is one of, I don't know if you've come across the Social Enterprise Alliance. So I will pass on to Joy to introduce herself.
Hi, so I'm Joy Tweed, and I'm a senior lecturer at the University of Westminster, which won the Social Enterprise Gold Award. Well, was awarded it, not won it, awarded it after a lot of work. So that's how I got to know Lucy and others. Outside of my lecturing role, I sit on a couple of boards and have got a long-term interest in governance and particularly, diversity on boards as well. So that's my interest. So great to see you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joy. Over to Kate.
Hi, Danny. Long time since I last saw you in Oxford, long time ago. So Kate Welsh, so I'm founder and chief executive of Social Enterprise Acumen, and also founder and chair of trustees of Acumen Community Buildings, which has this magnificent 500-year-old building as a centre for social enterprises and charities in the North East. And I do all sorts of things. I'm a Social Enterprise Mark ambassador, amongst other things. Very proud to do that for you, Lucy.
Yeah, and I'm very pleased that you already know Danny. You've proven my theory that Kate knows a hell of a lot of people. So Jess.
Hi, I'm Jess. I run my own consultancy that supports social enterprises make the best of what they do. I specialise in sort of communications and partnership work, but I also work for the Skoll for Social Entrepreneurs and Plymouth Social Enterprise Network. I'm technically on Skoll for Social Entrepreneur hours, so I have to slot them in.
Great. Gianna Golding works there too, yeah? Is that Skoll?
Anna Golding.
No, she doesn't. Okay, sorry, keep going. Yes, sorry.
No, sorry. I can't memorize all of them. We're so spread out because we're across like the whole flipping globe now. I'm going to look out for her now you've said it.
Cool. Over to Kathy.
Hi, I'm Kathy Brown. I'm the recently appointed Chief Exec at the Initiative for Social Entrepreneurs. So we're a social enterprise ourselves in Birmingham in the UK, and we help other people set up social enterprises and support them as they grow. And in terms of leadership experience, before that, I ran Engage for Success, which was the UK's movement for employee engagement. So leadership and engagement within the workplace is a big thing with me.
Cool, good stuff. Alison.
Hi all, I'm Alison Smith. I'm the interim CEO, director and lead consultant at Roots Human Resources. We are a social enterprise, and I will let Jan, who's down there on my screen, do the introduction of Roots HR as she's our founder. So I shall hand over to Jan for that.
Yeah, Jan.
Thank you. Hi everybody, and hi Danny, nice to meet you. So I'm Jan Golding. I'm the founder and the former chief exec of Roots HR, and I'm now chair of the board of directors. Roots HR is an outsourced HR consultancy for specialising in the social sector. We only work with social sector employers, not-for-profit type organisations, not for personal profit organisations, providing a range of generalist HR services. We've been going we're in our 14th year now, so that's taken some leadership in that time, I can certainly tell you. And never more than actually at the moment, when the burden of leadership is falling a lot on me and Alison for different reasons actually, but because we've got a strong growth ambition for the next 3 years and a strong growth strategy that we're just bringing to fruition to pave the way for a great time ahead of us for the next 3 years. Kathy, it's lovely to meet you because
I was just going to say I've got a good deal to thank both of you for, I'm sure, because they handled the recruitment process that got me my chief exec job. So,
and what you don't know, Kathy, is that ISE was the very first organisation that gave me advice when I set Roots HR up. Before we even had a name, before we were even going to be a kick. I went to ISE for advice, so it's lovely to meet you.
Karma.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
And Roots HR has been a social enterprise mark holder ever since the social enterprise mark came into existence.
Yeah. And
I'm proud to be a social enterprise mark ambassador for the organisation as well.
Thank you very much. It's great that there's those little links that were already there. You know, we're all over the country, and sometimes you just pop up and you say, oh, actually, I've had contact with that organisation, and then it's a name to a face. So that's really nice. So Danny, yeah, your name came up, I think, from when I had a discussion with Sharon down in Australia, who actually couldn't make it because it would be something like 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning for her. She usually makes it to these calls. I don't know. She seems to be a bit of a night owl. So she said she sends her regards, and she's going to look at the recording. So I had to make sure that I recorded. But that led me to look at your TED talk, and I was just really impressed with your thought process around kind of the term social entrepreneur and how the world really needs to change. So a number of people said, oh, it would be really good to hear you. So here we are, and it would be great to hear a bit about yourself, your role as a thought leader, if you like, in the social enterprise world, and also your thoughts on kind of the way in which the teaching and the way in which social enterprises and social entrepreneurialism is kind of over there, and how it has to come more into the mainstream in order for us to make the changes that need to happen in business education generally. So I'll hand over to you from now on, and then we can have a bit of a discussion depending on how you want to handle it. If people want to ask questions in between, then, you know, I'll leave it to you as to how you want to play it.
Sure. So we're a small group. I think we should definitely just have it be conversation style. Feel free to anyone pop in or speak up or raise your hand or whatever. I mean, just speak up, it's fine. I have PowerPoints out the wazoo, but I feel like I feel like we can just chat. Yeah. But if anyone's like, you know, really wants that, we can pull something up if we need it. But yeah, so let's chat. And then yeah.
Danny, but perhaps you could send me the PowerPoints afterwards, and then I can send them around the group.
Oh, I mean that my PowerPoints are usually just images, so they're not going to work.
Oh, okay.
For like, you know, but I can show, you know, we can use our work as like a self-explained situation. Yeah. But you know, I can show you, like, anyway, we don't need to get into it. Let's just chat. But I think also most of I think it sounds like the group has a lot of shared interest and experience, and so let's, you know, hop in wherever it makes sense. But I can give you just a quick background on me and why I have an opinion or care about anything related to these issues, and then what I'm interested in right now, and we can go into a conversation along the way, and or just at the end, however people feel.
Yeah.
So my background is I guess my background in this particular area is I worked in business, I worked in consulting, said I will never wear a business suit again. This was right after undergrad. I worked in a like business formal consulting firm, business suit 5 days a week. We were like trying to cut costs, which means cut people. And I was like, I'm never dealing with business again, which clearly something shifted since I ended up working at Said Business School, and I teach in business schools. And so the shift, part of that shift happened is I went to Cambodia, and first time I had visited, I came across a social enterprise that some of you might have heard of it. They've won the Skoll Award, DDD, Digital Divide Data. A friend of mine was the first president there, and it's now in Cambodia and Laos and Kenya, and I believe. But at the time they just started, and they were focusing on ex-trafficked women, people with polio, landmine victims. Now they work with just any young person who would like to access further education. That could be like, you know, you're going to a car maintenance program, or you're going to a 4-year accounting degree, it doesn't matter, but you would like to access education and you have economically that's outside of your reach. So you work with them doing data entry, and in the process of that you learn English and you learn computer skills, etc. And that's what you're doing half the day, and the other half the day you need to be enrolled in some sort of educational program with the goal that you're going to eventually follow your dream and move out into whatever education you want. Anyway, that was the first time I'd come across a quote unquote social enterprise, although I don't even know if they were using the terminology at the time. And I saw myself where I was like, wow, you're doing Microsoft Access, which I had learned in that consulting job and thought was evil, right? You're doing all these things that I had kind of written off as only to be used to like make money, and that, wow, you're using these to do good, right? So that was my first introduction to how business could be used in that way. And I don't believe that social entrepreneurship is just business, but we'll get into that. But that was my like kind of reawakening to the possibility of rethinking what the interaction was of innovation and business skill sets with social change. And so I ended up living in Cambodia for 6 years. I ran an education and youth leadership organization, a hybrid social enterprise, didn't use that terminology necessarily. Leadership development and education organization for Cambodian youth, and a volunteer travel company is how it started. And then we realized we were fostering moral imperialism by telling young, wealthy people from wealthy countries that they could land in Cambodia and bestow their benevolence. And what I learned from my own mistakes is we have to earn our right to do that. And so it became a development education company. So those things still exist. And the nonprofit really shifted and away from building things and building schools and all this stuff that was like about kind of more traditional philanthropy to capacity building and leadership development programming. And the travel company shipped from volunteer travel to development education. And then I came to Oxford and I did my MBA there and worked at the Skoll Center and was the deputy director there under the late Pamela Hardigan, who was a fabulous mentor and of mine. And through that work and in the interim time between those things, I realized that we were teaching social entrepreneurship in the same way that I was making those initial mistakes in Cambodia, which was like my, joke, but not a joke that I always say is that, students have an idea for an app for Nigerian farmers, which happened a lot, they'd never been to Nigeria, they never farmed, right? And we actually would pay for their flights and fly them there and give them credit for, this program and go to do interview farmers. And in the process of something like that, they realized that their idea wasn't grounded in reality to begin with. And as funders and educators, we were funding solutions before we were funding understanding, right? So there's this gap that like there was almost every program of social entrepreneurship, almost every MBA program right now has some sort of business plan competition or some sort of accelerator program or these hackathons, right? And so there's all these programs that are focused on like short-term, quick come up with your solution to an issue you do not understand. And very little tools, time, educational energy, accolades, and support are put into the piece of what is the problem? How do I understand it, right? So a lot of what I did at Oxford was, how do we kind of rethink our own programming to get out of that trap? Like, how do we incentivize, reward, and create content to teach system and problem understanding? So that, because right now all we're doing, students are enacting what we are providing, right? There was at Oxford, when I was there at the Skoll Center, there was only one pot of money that you could apply to at the end of the year, and that was the social business startup fund, the business plan competition, right? So you're supposed to be able to do this intense one-year MBA program and at the same time design your social business and be investment ready, before you graduate, so you can launch this thing, right? So we redid a few things. So one is, we took that business plan competition and said, instead of, at the time it was only for current students, so we said you can be any alumni ever, right? So like, go out and learn, and if in 10 years you get to a point where you're like, I have this unique contribution I can make and I want to start something, great, we're still there for you, right? So we opened it to alumni. We created other pots of funding. Some of this has since shifted in what the Skoll Center is currently doing, but at the time we created an apprenticing with a problem fund, which was only for current students, which said, like, if there's an issue you want to learn about, we now have a fund that you could use to go do an internship, do a research project, do a mapping of a system, because you're thinking about, contributing to an intervention, whatever. One student is from Hawaii and cared about economic growth that specifically doesn't leave behind or specifically focuses on Indigenous communities, and she was really interested in what was happening in New Zealand, right? So her program was that she wanted to, and she went to New Zealand and worked for a few months each at a series of nonprofits that were focusing, on similar issues there, right? So we changed that funding, created new funding. And then we also, and in order to even apply for that funding, we created a competition, which is still running, called Map the System. And it now is at about 45 or so universities around the world. And it's based on a really basic tool that I designed called the Impact Gaps Canvas, which is essentially less of a tool in the way that the business model canvas is a tool, and more of a mental framework of saying, if you're going to start a venture or be an activist or change policy or whatever it is, that if you are going to try to influence change in a system, it would help to first understand, what is the problem? What is the system? What's holding it in place? What are the numbers? What's the history? What is it like? Who benefits from it staying a problem? Like, what's going on, right? And then the other side of that is, who's already trying to solve it? Because if I think I want to contribute, it would really be helpful to already first know what's already being tried, what's been tried in other places that are related to this, what's happening with policy, what's happening with nonprofits, not just what the question we always ask in funding is, who are your competitors, right? Social business investors, who are your competitors? Why are you better? How are you going to win? No, who's already trying to solve this? And if you do that and you look at, here's the problem, here's the landscape of current solutions, then ideally you're going to be able to see some levers of change or impact gaps. So here's what's missing. People are focusing in this area, not that. This geography, not that. This demographic, not that. Or here's, this has been tried in a different country, not here. It's been tried in the next county, but not here. It's been, here's policy potential. Here's activism potential. Here's just knowledge sharing potential. Here's growth potential of things that seem to be working, right? Connections, right? So that when that's all outside of you, now you get to put yourself in and say, or your own organization, yourself as an individual organization, okay, how might we contribute? And my hope with that is that when you get to that point, you now can see how your work is actually going to increase the impact of others, right? Your work is going to unlock others in the system potential for change. And so that competition, Map the System, is antithetical to a business plan competition. Instead of saying, here's how I'm going to win, here's my idea, you're saying, here's my understanding of the problem, landscape of current solutions, potential gaps, right? And our goal was to change, with that was to change the conversation around business plan competitions. How, you know, how are people thinking about this? How are people teaching this? And we created a leadership program at Oxford called Leading for Impact, which I had designed, and it's now part of, it's changed into something slightly different at the Skoll Center, but, you know, kind of moving beyond this idea of just focusing on these social entrepreneurs. Like, how do we focus on wider students who want to have high impact careers, but they might not see themselves as the entrepreneur, right? So what happened even in that initial year, the number of people that applied for the business plan competition, I think it was at least 3 or 4-fold just in that first year. And then it's been exponential from there of how many people would apply for that system mapping competition, right? Because there were students who said, I'm not ready to pitch a venture. I don't even know if I'd ever want to lead a venture, but I have an issue I care about, right? Like that young woman from Hawaii who cared about that issue in Hawaii. She wasn't saying, I'm doing this so I can map this so I can figure out my venture. She's like, I'm doing this so I can map this so I can learn, so I can figure out how to be involved, right? And she had worked in nonprofits before, and she was going to take that knowledge back to the organizations that she had worked in. And the last thing we did was we created an alumni award, which we hadn't had before. We'd had like all these alumni accolades, you know, we would bring people in to speak and different things, and they were always founders, right? So we created a new alumni award that was specifically designed to look at a range of impact roles, right? You need to have the accolades, the inspiration, the role models also be reflective of different pathways to success, right? Because we were incentivizing this like one pathway. So since then, so at the time I wrote a report called Tackling Heropreneurship, and it was like, how do we move away from this idea of entrepreneurs as heroes? And I think since then, this conversation around systems change, systems leadership has really like become embedded in the social entrepreneurship conversation. But often so I feel like when I come across people, they're saying, what does that even mean, right? Like I hear it all the time, but like, what does that even mean, right? Or on the other side, I've seen this view that you have people saying, you know, I thought I was an entrepreneur, a social entrepreneur, but now I realize I am a systems change leader, right? And I'm like, oh, this is going in the wrong direction, right? Like that we've kind of already, it's impossible to think that your organization is going to solve a problem through your social venture by itself in a bubble, not giving, you know, not nobody else. And it's even more ridiculous to think that your organization is going to solve a systems problem and going to like, we're going to change mindsets and we're going to change policies and we're going to change, you know, and we're going to take it on, right? And so like that's where I think the systems conversation can go wrong. And so the work that I focus on, I call it systems-led leadership, which is like a counter, because originally I was talking about systems change leadership. Then I had that man say that to me and multiple people say I'm a system change leader. No. So now I talk about systems-led leadership, and what I mean by that as just like it doesn't need to be that term, but it can be anything, but just say, how do we view ourselves as part of a system that even if we took a nap, it's going to change, right? If you took a nap in 2019 and you woke up today, you didn't do anything, but the world certainly changed, right? If you really cared about carbon and decreasing flights, you're like, I did it, right? No, you didn't. It changed, right? So now, so the idea of being a systems-led leader is like, what's happening? Okay, now I get to look at myself. How might I want to contribute? So I view that as you have a systems theory of change. Here are possible levers of change. Here's a systems theory of change. It doesn't include you in it. And then you get to have your theory of change, which is how my organization or myself as an individual might contribute to this systems theory of change, right? And because the thing is going to change even if you take a nap, you have to be in some ways led by that, right? Like, and not constantly checking in like every day, like on your, you know, the way you check your Instagram or whatever. but because it hurts your brain to sit at that level. It hurts your brain to think at the systems level all the time, right? There's people like, oh, I can't. You don't have to do it all the time, but we have to do it at least at the beginning, and then at least somehow regularly enough that if that's once a year or twice a year, you're having a view of like, do we still think the systems theory of change makes sense given what's happening? Therefore, do we still think our theory of change makes sense? And are we still focusing on the right thing to contribute, right? And therefore, your measuring becomes, are we contributing? How have we contributed? How is it changing? We can't take credit for it, but we can see if we are contributing or if it's changing in the direction that we want. Okay, so I'm going to stop talking for a little bit and take questions or thoughts or move into conversation, and then happy to add more thoughts as we go.
People want to just chip in as and when, if they've got thoughts.
So maybe if I can chip in, I'm fascinated by this and so delighted about really understand the problem, please. I've been asked to judge these competitions like the Holt Prize and things. It's like inviting.
We called ourselves the Anti-Holt Prize. Hopefully this is not.
Thank you. And I kept saying, I'll come and help because I can give some advice about go away and learn a lot more before you even, meeting one homeless person doesn't give you an insight into homelessness, for example. Anyway, that aside, I think there's something that's for me really interesting around the journey of the individual. So many of our social, I suppose. Right, and I suppose there's also that picking out of social entrepreneur to social enterprise as well. So I sit in the world of social enterprise where the social entrepreneur or leader in whatever way has then looked for the business model to enable the financial sustainability of what they're doing. But that's just a different path for some people compared to others, I think. But it's that sense of lots of us are part of the reason for the social entrepreneurship or the social enterprise is to enable an individual to be able to have a better journey in life or be able to in some way live a better life. So there's that piece of how do you support the individual through the system whilst also trying to kind of do that levering of change in the system. And for example, I'm supporting the West End Refugee Service at the moment, who are in despair at the moment because they're doing everything they can to support a refugee community in Newcastle, whilst all obviously the stuff going on with Ukraine, racism is coming out left, right and centre in all sorts of different ways at the moment because of what's actually happening with what seem to be a different set of refugees because they're more European than others have been, some of those things, but yet they're still there supporting those individuals despite the Home Office system in the UK being appalling in the way that it actually treats people through the process. So I'm just interested in your take on, in a sense, sometimes we just have to keep on, our theory of change might be about helping an organisation despite an individual, despite the system, as well as trying to change the system at the same time or have those levers somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's about what is your goal, right? And oftentimes if I'm working with an organization, and sometimes you might have 3 founders of an organization and they're like, okay, we're doing this thing, right? Like we are handing out shoes to homeless people, right? Okay, we all decided we're going to do this. We're going to like get shoes and hand them out, right? And one person really cares about like shoes to homeless people, and the other person cares about like solving a system problem, right? So and then they realize, wow, actually we should be doing something else, right? So it's okay to hand out shoes to homeless people, but it just depends on what's your goal, right? Like if your goal is to help that guy at the end of the street because he needs shoes, get him shoes, right? Like, let's do it, right? If your goal is, there are lots of people in my community and I that seem to be homeless and I want to figure out where the gap is, it could be, okay, what's happening? What's already being tried? What's going on? And it could be that you find out there's an organization that trains people for jobs and there's an organization that gives them interview support, but there's nobody that helps them get nice clothing for that first interview. And actually you are filling a gap in the system and you're helping to do that through these, in partnership with these organizations that are doing the training, right? Or it can be, you know what, we actually want to do something else because we don't actually care about the shoes. We care about, getting people into their first job after living off the street. And we think there's a different gap that we can contribute to, right? So it is fine, you know, who does it? Ashoka has a thing, it's like changemakers.net, I want to say, but they have a systems online curriculum piece, and they talk about, you know, a social intervention, giving away the shoes, scaling a social intervention, giving a lot of shoes, right? And then a root cause, a systems intervention, and then they talk about mindsets, right? So there's any of those interventions are fine as long as your goal aligns with what it is, right? So Tom's shoes, he's giving away shoes. That's fine, but don't try and convince me that you're trying to change a system, right? So
there's
you just
a piece there which is making me think about Simon Sinek, and it starts with why. Because if you don't understand your why, and if you haven't translated that adequately into the story of your organization and what your mission is, then the likelihood is that you're never going to fulfill your why, because you haven't thought about that hard enough to work out how to deliver it properly.
Yeah, and I made a counter video once, which I can send you to Simon, that says focus on how, because I feel like the problem.
I do like how.
Yeah, well, the problem is that I think in the social sector, we sell a why, which is what Tom Shoes is doing. They're selling a why.
Yeah.
And that's what Simon Sinek is talking about, sell your why. Because, oh, wow, there's so many, in Cambodia, so many, where so many people, died during the Khmer Rouge, and the educators were killed, and right? So I can sell you the why. And if you get really excited about my why, do not ever give because of a why.
Mm.
Right? That's the problem. That's what we buy because of why. That's what Simon's trying to sell. It's like we buy because of why. Give because of how. There's 20 people that are selling you the same why. Ukrainian, let's say you want to support what's going on in Ukraine. How, right? What's the how of how? You're all going to tell me the same story of
why this is important.
Loss of home, and why this is important, right? So as a funder, or as someone who is actively choosing to give their time through a job, through employment, like, I'm going to not choose you because of your why. I'm going to choose because of your how.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. But it does align with what you said, Kathy. Yeah. My how has to align with the why, right? Yeah. If I'm claiming that I want to change a system, well, then my intervention needs to be looking at a system.
In a sense, doesn't that take you back to your theory of change? Because you're essentially saying there's an issue and a problem here, which is why something needs to be done. But this is the interventions that we are going to put in, whatever wording you want to use. That's the how we're going to do it to bring about the change that we're trying to achieve.
I think Danny's she's frozen she's frozen on everyone else's screen as well. Oh,
I think so. Boulder has rolled to a stop.
I've just noticed there's a load of people that were waiting as well.
Oh, you shouldn't be left in charge. You shouldn't be left in charge.
I know. They're coming.
You want to make somebody a co-host to help you with that?
I can let Danielle. So sorry, Helen and Aisha. Sorry, I hadn't spotted that you were in the waiting room. Have you been there long?
Oh, no, it's fine.
Sorry, Danny. There was also some other people in the waiting room that I hadn't noticed. Poor Helen and Aisha. I don't know if Aisha's actually there.
Yeah, I'm here. No problem.
Oh, okay.
Hi, everyone. How are you?
I'm fine, thanks. So sorry. You've probably been in there for half an hour, have you?
No problem. No, I've just been doing bits and bobs anyway.
Oh,
so.
okay. Okay. Well, Danny's just been telling us about her thoughts on systems change, and it's been really interesting. And hopefully, you'll be able to catch some of the discussion that we're having now about it, and you will be able to catch up in the recording, because I have recorded the session. So
Yeah.
Great.
And I'm sorry, my computer battery, anyway, I should have just left it plugged in, but I never know, it dies really quick. So I didn't know how much more time I had. I thought we could make it, but I didn't.
Yeah.
So we were kind of getting into questions and just conversation. So do we want to keep, does anyone else have thoughts from there?
I was wondering to what degree this emphasis on social entrepreneurialism has been a bit of a kind of a rope around our neck. Because when I first came into social enterprise, it was very much that kind of more community-based stuff. So ideas came from the community, they were embedded in the community, they were addressing a systems change problem. And what it seems to have turned into when it's being taught is, what is my problem? I want to make a difference. And this term, like you say, social enterprise and social entrepreneur means that, you know, there's some sort of pressure to come up with some whizzy idea in order to be able to solve the problem. And is it partly that we need to go kind of back to the roots of where social enterprise came from, which was, you know, from the likes of things like the cooperative movement, and I came, you know, with Kate from the sort of development trust movement, where it was very much about, you know, kind of activists coming together with a problem that they saw and solving that problem together, rather than it being about an individual coming up with a bright idea to solve a problem.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a few things in there. One is, some people would claim that social entrepreneurship came as a antithesis to traditional development models, as a, you know, we believe business is quick and agile and whatever, so let's take business straight. So we've already talked about that problem, is that we need to move away from this idea that we just need to take business strategy and stick it in, right? So yes, I do think, you know, if everyone was involved in a collective impact model, right? Great, the world would be fabulous. That's not realistic either, right? It's not realistic to think an organization that wants to have an impact is going to make a 20-year commitment and get deep knowledge, right? So right now I often sit at this other end of, I believe in collective impact work. I think it would be amazing, and we should be teaching it more and talking about it more and teaching it more. And when we talk about systems leadership work, if you read articles about that, it's discussing, you know, way beyond someone who's way beyond just doing their social enterprise. They really have a deep understanding of a system and a long-term commitment. Amazing if we could feel more of those. But the fact is, as an educator, you know, you're lucky if you have one student in your class on a social enterprise class who's really going to go, you know, do that work. And you'd be like 1 in 10 that's really going to be like a systems leader, right? So I do think, when I think about systems-led leadership, I also view it as like micro ways to, like, if I'm an organization and I have a CSR department, I'm giving away money or whatever, how do I just like rethink that in a systems way, right? How do I even just rethink about, you know, if I'm looking to give to funding about an issue about homelessness in my community, how do I just even think about that in a systems way, right? How do I, you know, as a funder who has more means, instead of just being like, I'm going to pick the 3 organizations I think are great and give them a check, like, is there gaps in the system? Can I fund, you know, action learning sets among them? Can I fund data sharing platforms? Can I fund a key point person to create a collective impact movement, right? So and that doesn't have to be that I am doing it collaboratively, right? So I do think there is this thing there where sometimes if I talk about systems of leadership, someone will raise their hand at the end of a talk and say, well, I really think that our sector needs to change, but how do I get other people to do it with me? And it's like, you don't have to at the start. You can just say, how are my actions going to be intended to increase the impact of others, rather than how am I going to win at solving this problem?
Yeah.
questions, thoughts?
Someone trying to come in? No, it doesn't sound like they are.
So does anyone else have any other thoughts or questions or want to take this in a different direction?
I was also just wondering how we can abolish this idea of you know, sort of the Dragon's Den type of competitions, because I've been asked to sit on one of those as well, and it just seems like that we're still kind of hidebound by that sort of model of, you know, pitching people against each other and not thinking kind of more collectively, and applying those sorts of I suppose traditional approach, well, seems to have become traditional approaches to social enterprise development that we see on the TV and the media. You know, is there a way in which we can more effectively demolish that idea and come up with, you know, this is the answer, rather than doing that, this is the answer? Because I would, you know, I was on a panel and I said, look, I'll be quite happy to be part of the panel, and I want to be able to see how these businesses are going to make a difference. But, you know, I'm one of you know, one of the panel, not the whole panel. So how do we, you know, are there ways in which we can kind of demolish some of this very old-fashioned thinking?
Well, the reason it's there, that's how we fund it, and that's how we celebrate it, and that's how we teach it, right? Mm-hmm. How we reward it. So like the social enterprise mark, does it ask for questions around system contribution? Does it, like, changing those things? Because all of a sudden you change those things and people are like, I need to learn about those things. I need to act in that way. When you think about any competitions y'all are involved in, how do you change it so that those things are required parts of it? And therefore it starts, we need to teach differently. We need to celebrate differently. If you're part of any funding movements, how do you fund differently, right? So instead of saying, who are your competitors? How are you going to win? It's how is your work going to contribute to the impact of others? Tell me other organizations that you're partnering with, learning from, right? So when we change how we fund, when we change the accolades, when we change the awards, when we change the certificates, when we change how we teach, that's how we change it, right? So we can each change it in our own little worlds.
Yeah.
I don't have the answer, but I'm a therapist by background, and quite often when I'm working in therapy process, we sit in the middle of a mess for quite a while, and it's really important to do that, because the true meaning and purpose of therapy then has space to evolve and come out. And so I'm just setting up another social enterprise at the moment. I trained in the School for Social Entrepreneurs about 15 years. It was when they first started at Dartington and Cornwall. And then I've been back in working in therapy and just about to launch a new one. And I must say that I am doing it very differently this time round, and actually shying away a little bit from the funding, because I really want our company to be authentic, and for our work to authentically connect with what's meaningful for the community that we're trying to reach. And I think the way to do that is slowly and small, and build up with integrity, and that does clash a bit with the I did look at some funding actually, and I won't say what funding, but it yeah, as you say, it was very Dragon's Den and bam bam bam, where's all these strategic things coming from? And actually, if we're looking at social purpose truly and authentically, there is a danger that you can lose it by trying to be too business-like, but at the same time you need to make it sustainable. But I think there is a balance to be had, and that we, as people who really truly believe in social purpose, can support each other by connecting and sharing our skills. But as I said, I don't have the answers. That's just my thoughts from hearing you speak.
What's your new, what are you working on? What is the new thing?
We haven't launched it yet, so I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say. But yeah, we have a new social enterprise called Rise and Rewild. So we'll be announcing it properly later in the year, but we're at the very seedly and bringing in our strategic partners, which is really exciting. And I ran my last social business for 11 years and it was amazing. So I'm very honoured to be able to have the opportunity to do that again, but also a little bit apprehensive because it is a lot of work and it's like having another baby, isn't it? But sometimes things are worth it if you truly believe, and I think there is so much need now at the moment, and there's so much need to support our NHS and social care that, you know, it's taking the financial risk to come out of the system to support the system, and it's finding the people around that are willing to help us to do that. But I've found in my career, which I've been a therapist for 21 years, that really actually funding schemes can not do harm, but they can take you in a very different direction. So that's why I've always been interested in getting the balance. And yeah, but my background obviously isn't business, so I'm very fortunate to connect with people like Lucy and the social enterprise mark to help us to grow. So
right, thank you.
I just had a quick comment about this. I might be coming into this like, I don't know if it's already been discussed already, but I'm just thinking about the image of social enterprises as Dragon's Den, business, all that kind of stuff. Sometimes I feel like people do that to meet the investment market at where it is at now, because unfortunately, I guess pure commercial investors, they sometimes don't buy into the social enterprise thing. If anything, they sometimes feel limited by it. They like it because it's a nice place to put their money, but sometimes the ones that are still kind of concentrated on commercials still want to see a return from their investment. So sometimes, I guess, to meet investors where they are at, where it's not purely social, they're not purely motivated by the social aims. We kind of have to brand ourselves as really commercial businesses and turning high profits and really competitive and all that kind of stuff. Because unfortunately, things like impact don't always convince them all the way.
Yeah. So what you're saying is that the innovators are just doing what they're being asked to do, right? That's what the funders are asking them to do. That's what the educators are asking them to do. That's what the accolades and awards are asking them to do, right? So 100%, if we can't change the funding. So I think if we're in that position, there is funding that is changing. There is funding that's changing, but we need to educate our funders, you know, which is not always the position we're in, but when we are in those positions, you know, and seek out funding that doesn't, you know, inhibit the actions that we take. And, you know, I always give an example of like a few examples I go to, but if you look at like My Bank in the UK, right, that founded by Lily LaPenna, you know, at one point a number of years ago, they were working on, they were working with their competitors in a cross-parliamentary group to try and change the law. And now, you know, and then eventually they helped change a few different laws, but they changed the law around, you know, the curriculum. And now students are getting financial literacy in the curriculum, right? So if they had a funder who just cared about, you're in 15 schools now, we want you to be in 45 schools, we want you to be in 125 schools, like why is our CEO spending all this time in Parliament, right? Like that would be a really myopic funder, right? To who just cared about the growth of the organization rather than the change. So that's where we need to seek out funding that aligns with our vision for change, right? And there's like a 2x2. I always say it's one of the only academic articles I ever recommend. It's called Making Hybrids Work, by Santos et al. I don't remember the others, but so when they say hybrids, that's their terminology for social enterprise, right? A hybrid organization. And so the article is a 2x2 because everything in business school is a 2x2. And the 2x2 is your client the beneficiary? Yes or no? So like, are you selling? Is the person who's buying it the beneficiary? And then the other part of the 2x2 is the impact implicit, or is the impact in the sale? Does it happen with the sale, or does it have external to the sale, right? So the upper left-hand corner is your client is the beneficiary, and your impact is immediate, right? So the example in there is a solar as a service company that is selling directly to emerging market consumers, right? So like their customers, their beneficiary, and every time that customer pays each week for their solar top up, they are saving X amount of carbon from other light sources. They are getting X more lumens of light to blah blah blah, right? Okay, air is X amount better in their home. Impact is immediate and customer beneficiary, right? If you're in that quadrant, we pretend all social entrepreneurship is in that quadrant. Most of it is not. But if you're in the rare situation where you are actually in that quadrant, it doesn't matter who your funder is. You can go for that funder that you go for the funder who just cares about scale, right? Because your impact is immediate, your customer is beneficiary. If you're actually in that quadrant, most of us aren't. If you're actually in that quadrant, who cares what your funder is? Just fund it, scale it, grow it, fine. Everybody else, most of us, are in a different quadrant, right? Even if you just were selling to nonprofits who are then giving it away, you're in a different quadrant, right? So if you're in the opposite quadrant, which is my customer is not my beneficiary, so so I have a sandwich shop and I'm employing X incarcerated people, right? My customer is the person buying the sandwich. My beneficiary is the person working at the shop, right? And then the impact is not immediate. The impact doesn't come from the sale of the sandwich. It's not like, oh, my sandwich is sold and the world's better, right? The impact comes from the training and the support and the education and the job finding outside of this and the home, whatever, all that's going into, right? If you're in that opposite quadrant or any of the other ones, then you don't want that cutthroat funder. Even don't take that cutthroat funder, because that cutthroat funder is gonna say, we could employ someone who was incarcerated 20 years ago instead of last week, or we don't really need to do that extra training, do we? Because that's taking a lot of our margins, right? So who is your board? Who are your decision makers? Do you have the beneficiaries in the decision-making role, etc.? So that article looks at those different quadrants and those different things, and I feel like that's something to consider. Go ahead, Kate.
One of the things we're beginning to see is what I would call relational funders. So we're beginning to see some funders who will sit with an organisation or an individual over a period of time and give in some patient funding. So I've just had a wonderful afternoon with Sellafield, of course, in West Cumbria. So that's the nuclear authority. I know, and it's kind of who do you take money from and things, but they have just this afternoon approved investment of somewhere, well, £85,000 into each of 4 organisations that we've been working with, which is long-term patient money to enable them to do what they do well and best. And that's bit, but what's interesting, what you were saying, Danny, about the kind of encouraging things. So they have said part of the condition for this is that you partner with the other people in the area where you're working with. So there's an element of small amount of conditionality of the funding, but it's much more that pushing to you working together will be much stronger. And they've been careful about who they've kind of worked with to be able to cover that right kind of range of ultimate beneficiaries of the work, which it's been really good. And then there was business support, which we provided, which has helped those organisations just understand what they do and measure and report on what they do a lot better, so you can actually kind of evidence what's happening. So it's not fully systems change, but it's good.
Yeah, Well, and if you have any influence on funders, anybody, no report. If you get discounted capital, right? So either free grant money or discounted investment money, because you have a claim of social impact, in my view, your reports should not just go to some funder. You should be required to actually educate. So like, instead of writing a report for me, write a report for the world that this is our key learnings from this. If something was going to do something similar, here's what we've learned in the last quarter, da, da, da. So that's just a separate thing. I know we have 1 minute left, so I'm going to hand it back to you, Lucy, but having me and inviting me, and it's great to all on International Women's Day.
Thanks Danny, and that's been a really interesting and quite brain invigorating session. I wondered if you've got any reading material that you can, or YouTube things that you could recommend to the group on systems change, because this is like a very interesting area and something that obviously I've heard Sharon talk about, and it's kind of made my head go a bit like this, and it would be really good to be able to know some more. So maybe if you were able to drop me a line, and then I can
mention a few things right now. So I think there's that Making Hybrids Work. It's not about systems change, but it's worth reading if you're running a social enterprise. There's online free courses through Plus Acumen on systems change that's run by Rob Rosigliano, and there's a lot of interesting stuff in there, and that they run that a few times a year. And then there's obviously all these paid courses through the Academy of System Change, the School of System Change, etc. And I think the other one I mentioned earlier that is worth looking up is Ashoka's, I think it's changemaking.net or changemakers.net, and they have some systems thinking work, specific for social enterprises that's worth taking a look at. And then there's a lot of writing about collective impact and systems leadership. And like I said, my only caveat in that is I don't think that we can view it as that everyone's going to be a system change leader. I think it's how do I contribute in a way that's systems led. So and my website, Systems Led Leadership, has a lot of reports and research stuff in there too. So
Great. That's really brilliant, and thanks ever so much for joining us on International Women's Day. And we should be saying well done to all of us women who are sitting here and thinking about how we can change the world. So thank you very much for everybody for attending, and we will hopefully see you all soon.
Ciao. Feel free to reach out.
Thank you, Danny. Thanks. Bye.